Accutron Watches presents. From New York City, this is the Accutron Show, a time travel through American culture with your hosts, Bill McCuddy, Scott Alexander, and David Graver. Visit AccutronWatch.com and discover the brand that has made American history with an all-new proprietary next-generation electrostatic energy movement. Accutron. It's not a timepiece, it's a conversation piece.
So maybe there's something that's wrong, maybe the weather's not great. Maybe I'm flying over water, which means that if anything goes wrong, if the engine quits for some reason, I have no option but to ditch in the water and maybe even pull the parachute.
The amazing person you heard at the top of the show is today's guest, world record-setting pilot and activist Zara Rutherford. She's the youngest female pilot to fly solo around the world, which she did over the course of a 5-month journey. But first, it took the three of us 5 months to get here. I'm Bill McCuddy, along with writer Scott Alexander and editor David Graver, and we are on a special episode of the Accutron Show. Stay tuned, buckle up. We're taking off right after this.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our iconic Space View 2020 collection, recreating the stunning visual impact of the original open dial design combined with an all-new electrostatic energy movement. Time just changed again. The Accutron Space View 2020.
Scott, what was your greatest accomplishment by the age of 19?
By the age of 19, the greatest accomplishment. Oh, goodness. I wrote a really long English paper one time.
Do you remember the grade?
B minus.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
And David?
I did a student ambassador program to Australia. I spent a month in Australia traveling along the coast from Cairns to Sydney, and that was very, very important to me. That and I guess a 50-mile bike hike. Those were my things. But
Really?
yeah.
I had moved several times, moved countries. I moved to England when I was 4.
Oh, that's big.
Grew up in England
Yeah.
until I was 10. And then I guess the biggest accomplishment was moving from England to Texas in 5th grade and not dying.
That's impressive.
Yeah, dropping into a public school in England.
But at no point in 5th grade
at
did
10
you
years
say
old.
to yourself, I sure would like to fly around the world.
I did not. I did not think it was really an option for me.
I'm not sure I flew, actually, before 19. My greatest accomplishment was probably working in summer stock theater and meeting a lot of celebrities and forming the, ridiculous future that I would have in this business. But, and what about you? Did you ever, think about, if I could just fly a plane, David, across even...
As a daydreamer, I always wanted to fly. That's what motivated. I was in 8th grade when I went to Australia. And from that moment on, I had this dream to see the world, which, as you know, is part of my job now. I spend half my life on the road traveling. Spent a lot of time in airplanes.
Do you remember the first time you actually flew in a plane?
I do. It was to Florida, and it was over Easter, and I was maybe in the 3rd grade. I went to see my grandmother in Florida. It was a big deal.
Scott, do you remember the first time you flew?
I do. It was actually flying to England when I was 4, and so it was a transatlantic flight.
Oh, you win.
I remember walking off the plane on the tarmac, holding my mother's hand and leaving a trail of my lunch down the aisle of this thing. I made it all the way off the plane, thankfully, but then I painted the tarmac in Heathrow.
And then you got dressed up? That was in the time period when
yes.
you got really dolled up to get on a
1975.
plane? And
yeah, you better bring your A game.
I can guarantee you that the pilot of that plane was male, that most of the servers on that plane were female, maybe a couple of guys.
Almost certainly.
The first time you flew, that pilot definitely was a man,
Most
I
likely.
would guess.
Yeah.
But we have somebody very interesting today. Zara Rutherford is from Belgium. She looked up in the sky when she was young and said, I would like to go around the world.
I want to go to there.
I want to go to there. That looks good to me. Yeah. She thought of this, and then a few years later, she went out. She got sponsors. Her parents were obviously pilots, but also must have not discouraged this.
Oh, yeah.
Indeed.
The whole family, actually. She has a younger brother who's flown around. We're going to ask about him. But her accomplishment is unbelievable. Recognized by the Guinness world record book, which is still a thing. And she did it in something like 155 days through the California wildfires, through COVID, around North Korea, through deserts, over oceans, in this tiny little plane.
Yeah, and a microlight airplane, one-seater, I think. It's like,
Yeah, definitely
it's really-
one-seater. Does it even have heat? I mean, she was in Siberia.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
She must have felt so alone,
The
so
amazing
remote.
thing, when I was a kid, again, right after I moved to Texas, I was at a friend was having a birthday party. It was like a very small thing because his uncle was going to take him flying. And so I got to fly in I guess it was like a 4-seater or something like that. It was like my friend's dad and his uncle and me and this guy, Alex. And I remember being like, wait, we're doing what? Like, we can just go to an airfield and get in an airplane? Like, because you think of it as like an airport. Somehow it's some magical thing. You don't actually barely see the airplane until you are through the jetway and all that stuff. So it's almost like you're going into a space capsule. It doesn't really feel like necessarily like you're flying. But you walk on the tarmac and you climb into a 4-seat vehicle. And then that vehicle goes up into the sky. It is a crazy miracle. Even now, I remember that just completely blowing my mind. And also then halfway through the flight, Alex's uncle goes, "All right, Alex, take the wheel," and he's like steering the plane. Which you can once you're up there. Landing is what I hear is the tough part.
Indeed.
Taking off is probably you need to know some stuff, but like landing is where it really comes in. He did not let Alex land the plane.
Well, yeah, unless you're Tom Cruise as a kid, this is probably not a good plan to let the
And I would say my
fly.
other most memorable flight, I got to do a 0G flight.
Oh,
Which
the
was
Vomit Comet.
The
or
Vomit
whatever.
Comet, yeah, which was amazing. So you're literally floating around a padded airplane.
That was for a story about NASA, I'm guessing? or-
That was actually a video game story.
Really? They spent some money.
They really did. Well, this guy made a lot of money on video games and spent it all on outer space stuff. He went to space. Richard Branson.
Yeah.
Oh,
Not Richard
right.
Branson. Sorry, Richard Garriott.
Funny you mentioned Richard Branson because he is one of the sponsors of this round-the-world trip that this 19-year-old phenom did. It's just an incredible story. We're going to meet her. She is going to school now in this country. She is got some plans that don't include maybe flying around the world again in such a small plane.
I'm so struck by the boldness to do that. It reminds me of like the idea of like, well, we've flown around the world. We've got airplanes. Like, well, we'll go to space. Like when President Kennedy was like, no, we're not just going to space. We're going to the moon. Right. Like just the drive that some humans have to go the next frontier, to really cross into the unknown.
I think I was at Sir Richard Branson's launch. I went to the Virgin Galactic launch in outside of El Paso, Texas.
I
and
wish
got
I
to
could
see-
act surprised.
That's quite remarkable. I did want to just add that my most memorable flight was not in a plane. I did, though I've been in many planes. I was in a Cessna last week. I love seaplanes, really into seaplanes.
If this is an LSD story, we don't want to hear it.
There are actually less blimp pilots in the United States than astronauts, and I took a blimp that was shaped like a cucumber across Long Island, and that was definitely quite the memorable flight. It was sponsored by an alcohol brand. I think you can guess which one.
Shaped like a cucumber?
It was literally colored. It was illustrated.
Oh,
as
the
a cucumber.
humanity.
You got to fly in a cucumber blimp. That's a record-setting.
Well, the last thing I'll add to this conversation is one of the very first jokes I did in my stand-up act 35 years ago, long before The Tonight Show and any of the other stuff I did, was about Amelia Earhart luggage. There was actually a product called Amelia Earhart luggage. And the joke wrote itself. All you had to say was, I'm no marketing genius, but I know you don't name luggage after a woman who mysteriously disappeared in an airplane. We will ask our guest if
we won't lose your luggage. We'll just lose the pilot.
Yeah, that was a tragic story. I'm sure Zara knows about her. We'll talk about all of that in an incredible round-the-world episode of the Accutron Show. Zara Rutherford joins us right after this. Don't go away.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our Accutron DNA collection. Reimagined for a new generation, the Accutron DNA combines breakthrough technology, precise engineering, and modern aesthetics to achieve a new level of technical excellence. The Accutron DNA, the new face of time for those who blaze new trails.
Zara, welcome to the Accutron Show. We are thrilled to have you here because you are somewhat of a miracle. What was the inspiration for you as a child to look up in the sky and go, someday I will circle that?
You're right. Yeah, no, thank you for having me. So I'd always dreamt of just going on this really big adventure, and I was really lucky that both of my parents were pilots, and so they kind of taught me how to fly. And then I guess I kind of combined that big adventure with the flying and thought, how incredible would it be to actually fly around the world? And so that's kind of how the idea came along. And then I kind of forgot about it for a few years just because I assumed it'd be too dangerous, too difficult, too complicated. But it's when I got to my senior year in high school, that's really when I decided to do it and kind of give it my best shot.
How do you begin to plot out a trip like that around the world? All of your stops, all of these like points to discover.
Right, yeah. So basically, I was trying to fulfill the Guinness World Record requirements for a round the world trip, and that includes crossing two antipodal points. And essentially, what antipodal means is 2 points that are the exact opposites of each other. So the North Pole and the South Pole are antipodals. And I think, for
Got it.
example, in England, its antipodal is like somewhere around New Zealand. But you can choose. So then I chose Colombia and Jakarta, Indonesia. And then I just had to go through those 2 points to kind of fulfill my requirements. And at the same time, I thought, well, if I'm going there, I might as well stop in some interesting places. So then I just kind of had some fun and chose like New York and San Francisco, and then, Seoul in South Korea and stuff like
So
that.
you actually spent some time in each place when you stopped there?
I tried to, but with COVID, it was tricky. And at the same time, I was trying to keep going, if that makes sense. So
Sure.
I tried my best to kind of have a look around, but usually it would just be one night.
Yeah, does Guinness have they say you have to hit antipodal points, but is there a time limit? You have to do it within 10 years or something, or is it within 6 months? Or
So no, there's no time limit, but you can't take a break of more than 2 weeks unless
Okay.
you have a good reason. So I was stuck in Alaska for a month,
Right.
and I was also stuck in Siberia for a month, and that was weather related. And so Guinness allowed that because obviously it'd be too dangerous for me to continue in bad weather.
Can you help us understand what it feels like to be in the aircraft that you were flying in, this ultralight aircraft? And then can you also tell us what goes on in your head when you're flying?
Yeah, so okay, so what's it like? So it's very small. Basically you sit in the plane for I think my longest flight was 8 hours, so up to 8 hours, and you can't move because the plane is too small to really move around. But the view is incredible because I had 360 views because I had glass all around me. So I had just the most amazing views. And then mentally, it depends what the flight is like. So maybe there's something that's wrong. Maybe the weather's not great. Maybe I'm flying over water, which means that if anything goes wrong, if the engine quits for some reason, I have no option but to ditch in the water and maybe even pull the parachute. The plane actually has a parachute. It's not for me, but the whole plane comes down. So on those kinds of flights where it's just a bit trickier, there's definitely a lot of stress involved. But on some other flights where the weather's great and it's easy and there's no turbulence, it's just the most amazing feeling.
So it's a single seater. It can go for, did I see in materials that you can fly for as long as, did you say 8 hours?
That's right, yeah.
So
8
what's the
hours.
distance of that? What's the longest you did in any one particular hop?
So my longest flight was 8 hours over water, was from Mumbai to Dubai, so India to the UAE. And I finally get to the end and I'm really tired and I just want to land and I want to eat. And then the air traffic controller tells me that there's a thunderstorm over my airport and the winds are 45 knots, which is, I think it's around 100 miles and it's like 70 miles an hour, I think.
oh my,
Wow.
And so I can't land in those winds, and I decide to divert elsewhere, and I do that. And I just thought it was so strange that like there's a thunderstorm over Dubai, which because I thought it was like a desert, so I didn't realize there were thunderstorms there. And so I ask around, and they tell me that apparently they were doing cloud seeding, so they were putting like particles in the air to purposefully make it rain.
Yep.
So yeah, that was interesting.
Thanks, guys.
Knew I was
You're
coming.
right.
Listen,
Yeah.
you mentioned COVID, and that happened when you were trying to land in China. And when China tells you can't land, that's different than the Philippines. I mean, that's a big chunk of land that you now have to go around. What did you do?
Yes, so I really want to go through China because I needed a way to get from Russia to South Korea. The thing is, in between those two countries, there's this other small country called North Korea that I'm not allowed to get
Gotta
into.
watch out for
Right.
that one.
Yeah, that one's tough.
Yeah. And so the best way to do that is to go around North Korea through China because it's all land. So at least if something goes wrong, I can land somewhere. And it's China, so they were very strict with COVID, but at least it's a country, at least it's land, right? The other way to go around North Korea is over the ocean. And that would have been a 6-hour flight over the water that I really, really didn't want to do. So we asked China for an overflight permit at, I think it was 6,000 feet, and they refused it because of COVID reasons. So I'm a bit annoyed.
You might give them COVID from 6,000 feet.
Right. I thought 6 feet was enough, but apparently, 6,000, not quite there. And so I had to go over the water instead, which ended up being fine, but it was just a tricky flight because it meant that I wasn't really supposed to go into Japan either. And so the Japanese said, hey, you can be 10 nautical miles into our airspace to avoid North Korean airspace. But because they stick to one another, but you cannot go any closer to our country unless in an absolute emergency. And so that's what I did. So I was about 15 minutes away from North Korea at all times, just kind of hugging its border, or the airspace border, I should say. And then once I was clear of North Korea, I turned and went straight to Seoul.
Do they have a special Guinness record for circumnavigating the globe during a global pandemic?
You should ask that. That's a good question.
I mean, it's
You won
really-
that one,
it's
is
an
what he's
extra
saying,
challenge.
basically. Yeah.
I mean, it's really wild.
Zara, unbuckle for a moment. We're going to take a break. But when we come back, we want to hear more about this incredible trip, and we have lots more questions. It's all coming up right after this.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our legacy collection, reviving some of the most memorable Accutron watches from the 60s and 70s. The legacy collection combines timeless design with the technical excellence of Swiss watchmaking, each limited to 600 individually numbered pieces. The Accutron Legacy Collection, inspired by the past, built for the future.
Welcome back to the Accutron Show. We are talking to a fascinating young woman who has flown around the world. What did you do today? Zara Rutherford is our special guest, and we've got more questions. Scott?
It's interesting to me. I know a lot of what your focus in doing this was to focus on the disparities between men and women around aviation and STEM. Is that right?
That's right, yes.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, so growing up, I was struggling to find female role models in aviation because people mention people like Amelia Earhart a lot, and of course, Amelia Earhart, what she's done or what she did is incredible. Even now, me looking back after my own circumnavigation, what she did is just crazy. I couldn't have done that. Even if you paid me like millions of dollars, I wouldn't have done that. And
What was so much more difficult about what you did?
okay, well, so I had satellite communications.
Oh,
I
sure.
had
Okay.
accurate weather forecasts. I had a GPS. I had good, reliable technology that she did not have. I think she had like a map and a compass, right?
And you came home. She had a
yes.
more tragic ending.
That too, which is exactly why it's so impressive because it's just she went out there with all of those risks and unfortunately didn't make it, but still the courage and the skill to have done that is pretty incredible. Especially with that, also for me, weather forecasts are so important, and she didn't really have any of that. And so growing up, it was kind of hard, but it's hard to see Amelia Earhart as a role model when you're 8 or 9 years old, because of course she's been dead for about 70, 80 years. And I was just trying to look for someone else that I could look up to who was preferably alive. And so for me, I think that was my parents because they were both pilots. But I never really found another girl around my age or a bit older And so that's not like now kind of what I'm trying to be is be this friendly face so that when other girls are interested in flying, they can kind of say, hey, well, look, she's flying and she actually flew around the world and I want to do that too someday.
To have done something so momentous at such a young age, how do you move forward, or what is the next big project that you hope to achieve?
Yeah, people ask me that a lot, and I think my default answer is wasn't flying around the world big enough?
Totally, totally.
No, but no, that's a good question. So for me right now, the next step is university. So I've just started studying aeronautical or electrical engineering. I'm not sure yet. And then I'd love to, go into space. I think that would be a dream, to work in space and become an astronaut. But I'm working towards it, and we'll see what happens.
Wow. Look, you talk about all of this in this conversation so routinely as though it's just something you did over a 155-day period, but it was really an incredible accomplishment. We've talked about it at the top of the show. There has to have been a moment when you were in fear of your life. Did you have some moments where you really almost did have to pull the parachute, or where you really almost did run out of fuel or hit some incredibly bad weather?
So thankfully, I never was in a position where I thought I was lucky to come out alive today. I never had that kind of moment. I did have moments when I had to consider what I would do. Like, so for example, there were quite a few moments when if something additional had gone wrong, then my life would have been in danger. But thankfully, maybe I was lucky or maybe something else happened so that I was never really in any critical sort of danger. I got close to a few thunderstorms a few times. I think when I got to Europe, the weather wasn't great, and so I ended up sort of following the valleys and the mountains at 500 feet, which was slightly stressful, but worked out in the end. And then, because I wasn't allowed to fly into clouds, so I should mention that. Clouds for me were a big, like, no. And probably the biggest thing for me mentally was Siberia, because Siberia was so remote that if anything was to go wrong and I had to do for any reason, if I had to do a forced landing, I would be so far away from any human being, like full stop, any human being, that rescue would probably take too long in those conditions. So when I overflew Siberia, it was minus 35 degrees Celsius, which is about the same in Fahrenheit, actually. That's how cold it is. And I was very much aware that if the weather was bad, there were no diversion options. And if I had to land on the ice, on the snow, then I'm not sure how long I could have survived in those temperatures to kind of wait for rescue.
What's interesting to me, one thing about, both going around the globe, but also doing it, in an airplane, is that you saw the world from the air. It feels like, did that give you a different perspective at all on the world, on the planet, on the countries?
Yes, it really did. So I used to think that places like Colombia or South Korea were extremely far away. Like I was really struggling to picture how close it was, I guess. I just thought it was so far away. And because I didn't know anybody from there, and I always saw that as the other side of the planet, and the other side of the planet is like extremely far away and whatnot. So then I found myself in Colombia, and I'd flown myself there, and I could picture the actual geographical scenery between Colombia and my house. And then suddenly it feels like it's a lot closer. And it's a really strange feeling, because it's like, when you drive from your house to your office and you can kind of picture that drive, and you know what to expect, and you can kind of see how it changes. And like I now can kind of do that with these places. Like I can kind of picture my way from my house to South Korea. And so then suddenly it feels like it's so much closer, and I find that quite nice because it kind of brings the whole world together.
You can go for dinner. Let's go to South
Right.
Korea.
Well,
I'm
yeah. I
hungry.
mean, it would take a very long time, but yes, it's like, although it took me 155 days and it took me a really long time and it was really difficult, it still feels like the world is a lot smaller than when I first left off.
Your feat is so inspiring to so many, especially young women and girls who don't have role models such as yourself. It speaks for itself, but is there something that you would want to say to them, to a girl out there that could potentially be the next flyer around the world?
Yeah, so my one big thing was always, for years, I never believed I would be capable of doing this because I was taking into account the difficulties, the costs, and I never knew how to get started. And I think actually, funnily enough, that was my biggest hurdle, was just that mental block. And once I decided, I'm going to go for this, and I was able to find a sponsor who funded the whole thing, and I was able to find help, and I was able to also find an aircraft company who would loan me an aircraft. All the pieces of the puzzle started to fit together. And I think that's important, is to don't look at it as flying around the world, or don't look at it as becoming this amazing pilot. Look at it as just completing a small, like a puzzle, and just slowly but surely it builds this amazing picture. Because if you want to start flying, just go to a discovery flight. That's like a 1-hour thing with an instructor. Go to your local flying school, check it out, see whether it's for you, and then slowly but surely build up. And I think that'd be my biggest advice.
You mentioned this. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, because you talked about it, the sponsors were, besides the aircraft company, Richard Branson was one of them. He's done some crazy things in hot air balloons and gone around the world himself. Did he have any, in space too, did he have any advice for you?
He did, yeah. I mean, I can't remember. I feel like I should remember. No, I'm extremely grateful to the Bransons for sponsoring. I think we had a brief conversation about his own trips, which were incredible. I don't think he gave you much advice, though. I think it was like, you're doing something crazy. Good luck.
He was probably asking you for advice.
Right, because he didn't make it around in the
No, you didn't.
Yeah, so my brother, he just got home. So he did his own trip, which was very successful. So well done to him. I'm very proud of him. And he's now back at school, finishing off his senior year.
Zara, thank you for joining us. I have a feeling that we're going to send you an Accutron watch, and we hope you will take it on your next journey, whether it's into space or back around the globe, or even just to South Korea or North Korea for dinner. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The Accutron Show. To listen to all of our shows, visit accutronwatch.com. To learn more about the world of Accutron, follow us on Instagram at Accutron Watch and subscribe to our podcast. From New York City, until next time, Accutron time.